This is Pintila, a 7-part series written and performed by me, Noah Diamond. Part 4. You Ain't Heard Nothin' Yet. A guy moves to a new town where he doesn't know anyone. So he goes to the local bar one evening, introduces himself, and explains that he's new in town. The bartender and 2 other men restrain him, while the many customers severely beat him for 1 hour. They kick him in the stomach, in the teeth. They break bottles over his head. And at one point, during a momentary lull in the torment, he manages to say, "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" And the bartender says, "Tradition!" We are so hooked on the familiar, so reliant on the regular fix of met expectations, that we think tradition is inherently good. Isn't that silly? In reality, of course, the act of doing something repeatedly over many years confers no particular virtue on that thing. Plenty of abhorrent things have been traditional, but we don't use that word to describe date rape or redlining. It's a word reserved for lighting the Sabbath candles or going out for breakfast on Mother's Day. You know, nice things. Because in our caveman brains, tradition good. Tradition so good, in fact, that we'll do things for no other reason. Everyone knows that Fiddler on the Roof is about tradition, but the guys who wrote it weren't so certain. Every day, Jerome Robbins would ask the writers, Stein, Bach, and Harnack, "What is this play about?" And they'd say, "Well, you know, it's about a poor milkman and the marriages of his daughters." And Robbins would say, no, that's the story, but that's not what it's about. Finally, one day for the millionth time, he said, "What is this about?" And they said, "Oh, for God's sake, Jerry, it's about tradition." And if there are 3 syllables of content that everyone associates with Fiddler on the Roof, it's that word, delivered with a defiant twinkle in the eye, shaking 1 or even 2 index fingers in the air. Tradition! Everyone turns into Tevye when they say the word. "Jolly good then, I've a rendezvous with Randolph at the tennis club because it's a tradition." That opening number has less impact in the movie. The movie doesn't really know what to do with the opening number because it's fundamentally theatrical, with comic vignettes, mostly dropped for the film, and all that direct address from Tevye. In the theater, when that opening number kicks in and those rows of grapevining shtetl Jews fill the space, singing that word right at you in this vigorous, unembarrassed, almost menacing way, Robbins directed his cast to perform the number with long necks. Well, it's so memorable that everyone remembers it, whether they've seen it or not.
Tradition! Tradition! Tradition!
But Fiddler is mainly a story about the dismantling of old ways. Tradition is an antagonist. It's the word Tevye yells uselessly at the sky before turning around and saying yes to love, to liberalism, to modernity, and to his daughters. He wants them to be educated, even though they're girls. He follows the lead of the young leftist revolutionary, Perchik. When Tevye and Golda dance together at their daughter Tseitel's wedding, they are casting aside hundreds of years of tradition, the terrible tradition of gender segregation. Soon all the couples are dancing together, and the rabbi is not thrilled about it. And then, perhaps to punish all these nice men and women for dancing together at a wedding that is the result of 2 people falling in love and deciding for themselves, rather than a business deal made by others, God sends a pogrom, which is also a tradition. Fiddler on the Roof lets us know that although Yenta the matchmaker is a lovable character, first played by B. Arthur on Broadway and by Yiddish theater legend Molly Picon in the movie, there's nothing nice about arranged marriage. Tevye's daughters envision themselves sold off to abusive old men.
It's just that I'm terrified.
Matchmaker, Matchmaker is a desperate cry for help from the most vulnerable victims of an oppressive system. It's also a crowd-pleasing showstopper. The third daughter, Chava, pushes Tevye too far. And although it sounds like a joke, you know, he can accept Hodel relocating to Siberia, but not Chava marrying a goy. It's serious. We're supposed to understand when Tevye says that his daughter is dead to him. And we're supposed to feel heartened by his little, "May God be with you," at the very end, muttered under his breath. To me, it's always played as a concession small enough to be meaningless, and stunningly cold behavior for a father under the circumstances. This really could be goodbye forever. Give your daughter a hug. What the hell is wrong with you? Some will say, oh, well, that's a very 20th century American Abie's Irish Rose way to look at the Chava story, but it's not just that she likes a guy who's different and let's be tolerant. She is an apostate, you see, because in order to marry Fyedka, she would have to be baptized in the Russian Orthodox Church. Well, okay, that's weird. But we specifically don't believe in that, right? I mean, people who have been baptized and people who haven't are exactly the same. You throw her a towel, look, a dry Jewish girl. Whenever we discuss bad behavior in previous eras, we hear, that's the way things were, and, well, it was a different time. Sure, we all get the famous L.P. Hartley line, the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. And it's always true. I mean, if you're talking about anything that happened in the past, you can always wisely point out that it was a different time. But this has been wildly overused, let's say, to excuse the worst. Lots of Americans use it to wave away any critique of slavery. But when slavery was normal and legal and the way things were, not everyone accepted it. There were plenty of people who were abolitionists, who saw with perfect clarity that this was an atrocity. It's not that those people had some prophetic sense of what would one day be considered correct. They were correct then. Their opponents were wrong then. The past is not a foreign country. It's what we did yesterday. So when you consider the extreme gender bias of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, yes, that's because these religions were invented during a different time, and that's how things were then. And it is also because these religions are horribly misogynistic. If you believe in God, and if your faith and its texts assign a masculine identity to that God, then yes, you do believe that men are closer to God, and women are lesser and subordinate. Some very religious people believe women to be appliances built to provide offspring and food. This is an evil attitude that rises from the Bible like odor from a decomposing corpse. Tradition is not a reasonable excuse for subjugating half of humanity. In the Tevye stories, Shalom Aleichem provides two different endings. In one, Tevye and what's left of his family leave the Pale of Settlement for what they call the Holy Land in Palestine. In the other, Tevye's plan is unspecified. But the creators of Fiddler on the Roof concluded with the family on its way to New York, America. So we know what happens. Tevye and Golda wind up on the Lower East Side. Golda works in a garment factory with my great-grandmother Jenny. Tevye has a pushcart. They uphold many of the old customs from Anatevka, and they also adapt and modernize. And Mottel and Seitel's baby grows up and directs Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. For some, deriding Fiddler has long been a sport. Philip Roth called it shtetl kitsch. Some have accused Fiddler of being goyish, a funny thing to call a work that's about Jewish characters and themes and was created by Jewish artists. To say Fiddler on the Roof is goyish is really to say that it is American. Fair enough, it is a Broadway musical. But if Fiddler is goyish, what is there left to say about My Fair Lady and The Sound of Music? I mean, besides the fact that they too were written by Jews. Stephen Sondheim, the greatest of all songwriters, and therefore also the greatest of all Jewish songwriters, said that you shouldn't adapt a piece of work unless you think you can improve it. And that's what his friends did with the Tevye stories. The stories are indeed darker, messier, and more ambiguous, and Fiddler is easily the more satisfying work of art. Partly that's the power of musicals. But also, the stories are narrated by Tevye, and everything is seen through his eyes. The musical, by making his daughters equal protagonists, goes deeper. The title, opening and closing moments, and central metaphor came not from Shalom Aleichem, but from Marc Chagall, also a clear influence on Boris Aronson's scenic design. Chagall's paintings of Jewish fiddlers, sometimes standing on or floating over shtetl rooftops, seem to represent transcendent joy. But most people will tell you that the fiddler represents tradition. I'm not sure about that. What Tevye tells us at the top of the show is that in Anatevka, everyone is like a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. So the fiddler represents precariousness and uncertainty, and defiant happiness in the face of harsh realities. At the end of the opening number, Tevye confirms that the fiddler does not represent tradition by explicitly telling us,
without our traditions, our lives would be as shaky as a fiddler on the roof.
There you have it. The fiddler represents uncertainty and precariousness, and tradition provides a feeling of stability, or as Woody Allen said, the illusion of permanence. At the end of the musical, when Tevye and his family are leaving Anatevka forever, he hears the fiddler playing behind them. He stops and turns, then beckons for the fiddler to follow. And as the family trudges off toward an uncertain future, the fiddler follows them, scratching out the same pleasant, simple tune that opened the show. The movie closes with this exquisite, heartbreaking 20-minute sequence showing the departure from Anatevka, beautifully directed by Norman Jewison. It's quiet and foggy, as all the people we've met in Anatevka wander sadly away from their homes. The synagogue is emptied, the rabbi disbands his congregation and carries the Torah away with him. Tevye and the fiddler get the final moments. Despite the devastating circumstances, Tevye is uplifted by the old familiar music. And his weary trudge into uncertainty becomes a proud and defiant strut. The end. This has been widely interpreted to mean that even though the family has been exiled from Anatevka, the precious ways of the old country will always be with them. But wait a minute. The fiddler doesn't represent tradition. He represents uncertainty and precariousness. So while it may be true that they'll always uphold many of their old traditions, that was never in question and isn't the point. What follows them to America at the end of Act 2 is the constant peril and anxiety of an underprivileged life in an indifferent universe, and an insistence on playing music anyway. The fiddler represents the life you know, the circumstances of reality, things that follow you, that are true no matter where you go, or what you do, or what is done to you. Whereas tradition is just the opposite. Tradition doesn't follow people. People follow it. The Yiddish phrase pintila Yid means something like the little Jewish point or spark, and it refers to the mystical concept of a kind of inner something that all Jewish people have, no matter what. Writing for the foreword in 2006, Hillel Halkin compiled a list of freer translations from English sources. They include the core of Jewishness, the little point of light, the quintessence of Jewish identity, the essential Jew, innate Jewishness. Halkin says, it's a way of referring to an indestructible core that supposedly exists within every Jew. It posits that all Jews, even if they do not know they are Jewish, have within them an essence that can be activated. A point, a spark, a quintessence. Nothing sacred or holy, because nothing is sacred or holy. This confers no elite status in the eyes of an all-powerful cosmic father figure, because there is no all-powerful cosmic father figure. Nothing fundamentally superior to the spark inside every human being, but this is ours. So when we hear the music playing behind us, we might as well turn around and beckon for the fiddler to follow, as with Tevye and his family, away from the primitive religious life and toward the acceptance of precariousness and change and uncertainty. Our lives are as shaky as a fiddler on the roof. Okay. The very concept of the pintila Yid confirms that the human impulse, the path of progress, is away from the insular and spiritual and toward secular, diverse community. The pintila Yid is a reassurance that it's okay to part with tradition because the inner spark will endure. In the middle of the 1930s, the Yiddish poet Yankov Glatstein left New York to visit his mother back in the shtetl and experienced the ominous anti-Semitism gathering in Europe. It fueled his writing for years, including the seminal 1938 poem, Goodnight World. Goodnight World is a landmark, as frequently referenced in analyses of Jewish identity as Fiddler itself. But the bitter narrator of Glatstein's poem is making the opposite of Tevye's journey. Away from America and the West, away from modernity, and back to the shtetl. Good night, wide world, he says. Big, stinking world. Not you, but I. Slam the gate. I'm going back to the ghetto, he says, ranting about his disgust with Germans, with Poles, with democracy. He says goodnight to the electrified, arrogant world, returning to kerosene, candle shadows, eternal October, tiny stars, and the bright Yiddish prayer book. World, he says, I walk gladly toward the quiet ghetto light. And he offers the world a token of his bitterness. Good night, world. I'll make you a gift of all my liberators. Take back your Jesus Marxes. The tantrum ends in an expression of happiness in defeat. It weeps in me, he says, the joy of coming home. Around the same time as Glatstein's trip to the shtetl, a similar visit was made by Jerome Rabinowitz, a little boy from New York, who would later become Jerome Robbins. He remembered that childhood visit as a magical experience, stepping into the world of his family's past and finding great comfort there. Many years later, as a grown man, Robbins attempted to repeat that visit. But after countless pogroms and the Holocaust, the village was simply not there anymore. No trace of anything or anyone. Robbins broke down and wept in the soil of the vanquished shtetl, and poured his feelings into the creation of a musical that brought it all back to life and inspired the world to remember and identify with it. Robbins' family's village was called Rezhenka. It's mentioned in the libretto of Fiddler as a tribute.
In a village called Rezhenka, all the Jews were evicted, forced to leave their homes. For what reason? It doesn't say.
What Robbins found or didn't find on his second trip to Rezhenka is what Gladstein's man in Goodnight World would discover just a few years later: the haunting photographs of Roman Vishniak, documenting Jewish life in Eastern Europe in the years immediately preceding the Holocaust, are like the last photos taken in Hiroshima before the bomb. When he was casting the Fiddler film, Norman Jewison would use Vishniak's photographs to populate Anatevka, telling his casting director that the rabbi should look like the man on page 3 of Vishniak's book. Of course, art couldn't really restore what was destroyed by the enemies of peace and freedom, any more than it could literally resurrect the dead. But nothing can do that, and art doesn't claim to possess the power. Art is a vehicle for memory and a counter to uncertainty and precariousness, even when, like the Fiddler, who is an artist, it's expressing those very things. For those of us who have said "good night world" to the spiritual life romanticized, but not practiced, by Robbins and Gladstein, art is one way of having a transcendent experience. It's hard to miss the similarities between art and religion. A house of worship is basically a theater, and my very religious Aunt Sarah, when she was a young woman, was also very interested in theater. She took acting classes in New York, and at some point she knew Zero Mostel. When I learned about this, I was full of questions, but all she could tell me about Zero was that he didn't eat well. Apparently, the transcendence faith offers is not satisfying enough to eliminate the need for theater, including by religious institutions. Churches do theater a lot more than actors go to church. And 100 years ago, the Lower East Side of Manhattan supported a thriving Yiddish theater district, with 2nd Avenue as Broadway.
Riverside Drive, 5th Avenue, Gassen stehen auf Pracht, Broadway wird es beleicht, City 8 los der Nacht, Singer Building, Woolworth Building, Statue of Liberty.
It was here, not in Fiddler in 1964, that New York audiences first met Tevye. The actor most associated with the role then was Jacob Adler. His daughter, Stella Adler, would become an important acting instructor and theorist, and his son, Luther Adler, would become the first of 8 actors to succeed Zero Mostel as Tevye on Broadway. The other king of 2nd Avenue was Boris Tomaszewski. He never played Tevye, but one of his big hits was Das Pintele Yid. It premiered in 1909 at Tomaszewski's People's Theater on the Bowery. It was a musical melodrama about a young man whose father has walked away from family and faith. So the son has to redeem the father by showing him that pintila, the spark he has inside him.
Je litten du das Schuld vor dem pintele Jid, doch muss ich allermut bleiben pintele Jid. Der Kleinigkeit je vrolijk bent, lachen die ramoelig bent, en blije bij dein pintele Jid.
And the play ends with a spectacular Star of David and the words Das pintele Yid descending from the rafters, while the cast sings Yankee Doodle in Yiddish.
Bugle call, one moment's bliss. To them it's just a little love, a little kiss.
In 1917, the writer Samson Raphaelson attended a performance of the musical Robinson Crusoe Jr. The star, Al Jolson, performed Tin Pan Alley songs with an emotional intensity that caused Raphaelson to exclaim to his date, "This is not a jazz singer, this is a cantor." Speaking with the star after the show, Raphaelson learned that he had come by it honestly. He was born Asa Jolson in a Lithuanian shtetl in 1886. His father was a rabbi and sometime cantor. Raphaelson was inspired to write The Day of Atonement, a story about a Lower East Side kid named Jakey Rabinowitz, a.k.a. Jack Robin, who must decide between taking his father's place as a cantor in the synagogue or being a jazz singer on Broadway. Raphaelson then adapted The Day of Atonement for the theater, retitled The Jazz Singer, and it opened on Broadway in 1925 with George Jessel in the lead.
Back in childhood days I can remember loving caresses all showered on me.
A couple of years later, when Warner Brothers produced the film version, Jessel was out and Jolson was in. Jessel was always able to say that he would never have done that movie because of what they did to the story. The play ends with the hero forsaking Broadway and becoming a cantor. In the movie, just before his father dies, Jakey swoops into the synagogue to sing Kol Nidra on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. But he then continues his Broadway career as Jack Robin with his mother applauding in the front row. So in the movie, you assimilate with American culture, but the pintele Yid endures. In the play, good night, world. Of course, the reason this particular story remains so vivid is that it helped create the world we live in. The 1927 film is the first feature with synchronized sound. It's as significant as anything in the history of film. And considering that, it's surprising how Jewish it is. Within the first 5 seconds, there's Hebrew lettering on the screen. Orthodox life on the Lower East Side is presented knowingly and with extreme seriousness. This is not to say that it's completely positive. The hero's mother is introduced with an intertitle that says, Sarah Rabinowitz, God made her a woman and love made her a mother. Oy. But Sarah is at least a warm and sympathetic character. The father is simply an asshole who threatens his son with physical violence. The son says, if you hit me again, I'll run away and never come back. And his father hits him again, while his mother sobs in the next room. The boy leaves, and the father is like, well, let's get ready for synagogue. Moments later, he's already full of self-pity. I have no son, he says, in a bitter intertitle. In those early scenes, young Jakey Rabinowitz is played by 13-year-old Bobby Gordon. But when we first meet him as an adult, played by Al Jolson, he's eating ham. In cinematic terms, this would be referred to as a trafing shot. He gets up at Coffee Dan's and sings a sentimental ballad from the musical Bombo. And then, before our eyes, tradition is discarded and the 20th century really begins.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. No, listen. Play Toot Toot Tootsie. 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie, don't cry. makes me kiss me pretty and then, ow, ow, do it over again. Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you know I'm in jail. Hey, hey, don't cry, Tootsie, don't cry. Kiss me, Tootsie, goodbye.
Although it's thankfully absent from this classic number, something we can't help noticing about this film is, of course, the use of blackface. It is disturbing and regrettable, as always. But in this story about ethnic identity in America, there is something else going on besides the standard revulsion we feel when we see blackface. The Jazz Singer is the story of an identity crisis. The Jewish Rabinowitz struggling to coexist with the American Robin. But Robin is a cipher until he blacks up and becomes this artist. Now he can summon in a Broadway theater the passion he brings to the synagogue at the end of the movie. There is something desperate and tragic about Jolson's manic energy, a man who wears a mask on top of a mask on top of a mask.
Hey, do it over again. Watch for the mail, I'll never fail. You don't get a letter, then you know I'm in jail. Da, da, da.
Some say that when Jewish entertainers like Jolson or Jessel or Eddie Cantor performed in blackface, they were trying to identify with black people and black artistry in a positive way. To this day, there are devoted Jolson fans who are quick to acknowledge that blackface was wrong then and wrong now, and also to note their heroes' civil rights credentials and personal friendships with black artists. On the other hand, classic Hollywood's take on the Old South remains to this day an impediment to racial justice in America. The argument about whether these entertainers and studio heads were racists or were merely trying to sell tickets to racists feels more beside the point every day. An inherently racist system was perpetuated. After all, it's just as valid to insist that when Jewish entertainers performed in blackface, they were identifying with white people, currying favor in a white world by participating in the subjugation of black people, using the advantage of pale skin to gain entry to restricted spaces where they sold appropriated black artistry. The close association of Al Jolson with blackface, and the fact that The Jazz Singer is where modern audiences are most likely to see blackface, can create the illusion that this was mainly a Jewish problem. Really, its origins are in old southern venues where Jews were as unwelcome as blacks. The acknowledged father of minstrelsy was Thomas Dartmouth Rice, a Protestant of British ancestry. Rice didn't invent blackface, but he popularized it, and the name of his most famous character would be used to describe the racist policies of the American South: Jim Crow. So making Al Jolson the poster boy for blackface feels vaguely anti-Semitic because it holds a prominent Jew accountable for a crime everyone was committing. Nearly all of our classic showbiz heroes did it at some point. Not just Jolson and Jessel and Cantor, but Fred Astaire and Judy Garland and Shirley Temple, and even black entertainers like Burt Williams and George Walker. These blackface performances don't have to be maliciously intended, as they usually weren't, to be inexcusably racist, as they always are. I also think that Al Jolson, especially in The Jazz Singer, is somewhat different. Still not okay, but different, in ways that are worth thinking about.
I'm so happy.
Look, Eddie Cantor on film is still terrifically entertaining. He's great, but when he comes out in blackface, like in Whoopi in 1930, and sings My Baby Just Cares for Me, all his delightful quirks and mannerisms become demeaning. His smile becomes grotesque. There's an undercurrent of cruelty. And he seems disconnected from his own appearance. Cantor in blackface delivers lyrics decorated with Yiddish. The lyricist Gus Kahn rhymes Lawrence Tibbetts with kibitz, but Cantor doesn't seem to be in on the irony.
My baby's no Gilbert Pan. Ronald Coleman is not her man. My baby just cares for me. My baby don't care for Lawrence Tibbetts. She'd rather have me around to Tibbetts.
If you could wipe the cork off his face, you'd have a perfectly wonderful performance. You couldn't do that with Jolson in another 1930 film, Big Boy. Here, he's supposed to be playing not a blackface performer, but a real black character, who is highly charismatic, always the smartest and funniest person in the room. A character a lot closer to Groucho than to what we expect from minstrelsy. In a flashback set on a Kentucky plantation in 1870, he leads a chorus of recently liberated black men, played by black performers, in a rousing Go Down Moses. All at once, we're at a revival and a seder, a plantation and a shtetl. Whatever we find wrong about all this, and there is plenty, it is interesting and complicated. In The Jazz Singer 3 years earlier, his big number at the end is My Mammy, one of his big hits, written by Walter Donaldson, Joe Young, and Sam M. Lewis in 1918. The song is no more comical than Go Down Moses, although it might make you laugh for various unintended reasons, including the emotional intensity of Jolson's performance. What Samson Raphaelson responded to in 1917 is still a disconcerting thing to grapple with. Mesmerizing and beautiful and excessive and embarrassing and terrible, and in some very American way, authentic.
I'm coming. Oh, God, I hope I'm not late. Mary, don't you know me? It's a little baby. I
wish he were not in blackface. I don't like watching it because the sight of him in blackface is upsetting. But I'm not sure it's gratuitous here the way it usually is. The various remakes of The Jazz Singer are basically bereft of whatever is good about the original, not because they don't have blackface, but because they don't have Jolson or a comparable star whose identity maps onto the story in a way that adds depth to the melodrama. Today, it's impossible to accept Al Jolson as an avatar of modernity and sophistication, but in 1927, that's what he was. When he sits down at the piano and performs Irving Berlin's Blue Skies for his mother, he sings and speaks in synchronized sound.
Bluebird, singing a song, nothing but little bluebird, all day long. You like that slapping business? Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Noticing the days hurrying by, when you're in love, oh, don't they fly? Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but.
When his conservative religious father bursts in and interrupts them, everyone goes back to speaking in titles, and it turns back into a silent movie again. Now all the voices are in our heads.
You dare to bring your jazz songs into my house?
You're of the old world. If you were born here, you'd feel the same as I do. Tradition is all right, but this is another day. I'll live my life as I see fit.
A singer in a theater. You from 5 generations of cantors.
You taught me that music is the voice of God. It is as honorable to sing in the theater as in the synagogue. My songs mean as much to my audience as yours to your congregation.
Leave my house. I never want to see you again, you jazz singer.
There was no way this character, as played by this actor, would forsake the bright lights of Broadway for a quiet religious life, and there was no member of the audience who wanted to see it end that way, with the possible exception of George Jessel. On the other hand, the anger Jessel expressed about the apostatic ending of the film was certainly sour grapes about being forsaken for a far bigger star. It's not as though he decided to abandon the limelight for piety, as he certainly could have if it was that important to him. Miscegenation is right under the surface in The Jazz Singer. Mrs. Rabinowitz worries that her son has fallen in love with a shiksa, and at the end of the film it's clear that he will live happily ever after with Mary Dale. In the play, when he says goodbye to Mary, it isn't a mere career decision. He's choosing a life that will demand a Jewish wife and family. Not a big deal for Jessel. Not only was he happy to marry 3 Gentile women and spend quality time with many more, the same year The Jazz Singer closed on Broadway, he starred in the film Private Izzy Murphy, a comedy about a Jewish man who marries an Irish woman. Private Izzy Murphy was part of an entire genre of Jewish-Irish romantic comedies popular in the 1920s after the success of Abie's Irish Rose by Ann Nichols. Today, Abie's Irish Rose is mostly remembered for its long run, referenced in the lyrics of Rodgers and Hart's Manhattan.
Our future babies will take to Abie's Irish Rose. I hope they live to see it close.
Abie's Irish Rose is also remembered for the vitriol heaped upon it by New York City's literary elite in general and Robert Benchley in particular. For every issue of the humor magazine Life, Benchley concocted a new capsule description. To this great humorist, Abie's Irish Rose was the comic spirit of 1876. It was America's favorite comedy, God forbid. People laugh at this every night, goes one Benchley lament, which explains why a democracy can never be a success. When Benchley asked for reader submissions, the winning entry came from Harpo Marx, who declared Abie's Irish Rose no worse than a bad cold. Well, even the opinions of geniuses could use a grain of salt. There's no real mystery about why this play held Broadway's long-run record for 14 years. It's good. It's a solid, tightly written crowd pleaser. It's taken some heat for ethnic caricature, but the criticism is overblown. There's a Jewish father and an Irish father who disapprove of intermarriage, and their parts are written in dialect. But these are endearing characters, rendered with humanity and good humor, and they come around to discarding their narrow points of view in favor of modernity and true love, the same journey Tevye will make on Broadway 4 decades later. Ann Nichols was a remarkable figure who deserved better than the disrespect shown to her work by writers who ought to have considered her a peer. The author of Broadway's classic Jewish-Irish love story was a Southern Protestant who ran away to become an artist. She had written some moderate successes, including the book for the musical Linger Longer Letty, when inspiration struck and she wrote Abie's Irish Rose in 3 days. It was a hit on the West Coast, but when it failed to attract New York producers, Nichols pawned everything she owned and produced the show on Broadway herself. And so, she was the author and sole financier of the biggest hit in Broadway history, independently wealthy long before it closed. Part of the lasting value of Abie's Irish Rose is that it established the tension between Jewishness and non-Jewishness as fertile ground for mainstream American entertainment. It set the table not just for The Jazz Singer and Fiddler on the Roof, but for Annie Hall and 1,000 other stories about a boy and Goyle.
I say we'll go to court and we'll get out a writ of habeas corpus.
Yes, a corpus. It's a corpus.
Didn't you ever see a habeas corpus?
No, but I see habeas Irish Rose.
There's very little explicitly Jewish material in the films of the Marx Brothers, but their attitude is unmistakably Jewish, and when I was a kid falling in love with their work, knowing they were Jewish was part of the fun and part of what made me identify with them so strongly. This applies to Groucho Marx somewhat more than to his brothers, because Chico always played an Italian character and Harpo was otherworldly. But Groucho Marx on film was a super Jew, an unstoppable verbal athlete, doing circles around everyone he encounters. People like to say that the Marx Brothers represent traditions like commedia dell'arte or clowning, but they are more essentially New York City street kids running wild. Groucho is the kid who arrived first and now runs the place. He's a fraud, but he's there to mock and expose all the other frauds. He's an explorer in animal crackers, a university president in horse feathers, but he isn't really any of these things, any more than he was Napoleon in the Marx Brothers' breakthrough vehicle, I'll Say She Is, on Broadway in 1924. He was dressed as Napoleon, but he made no effort to play the role convincingly. This Napoleon wore glasses and had a grease paint mustache and eyebrows, and talked exactly like Groucho Marx. Later in life, as an avuncular TV personality and literary figure, Groucho sometimes presented a more neurotic and self-deprecating sensibility. Consider the classic epigram about not wanting to belong to any club that would accept him as a member. And we can hardly fail to add that when he was told he couldn't use the swimming pool at a restricted club, he asked, could his daughter, who is only half Jewish, go in up to her knees? Has anyone ever said anything better than that? But the Groucho character, the comedy icon of the 20s and 30s, was anything but neurotic, anything but vulnerable. He was armed with inspired material by mostly Jewish writers, among them George S. Kaufman, Maury Riskind, Bert Kalmar, Harry Ruby, and S.J. Perlman. And he delivered this material in a style, voice, and accent that was quintessentially New York and Jewish. What he left behind is not only the greatest work ever done by a comedian on film, it's an invaluable record of how first-generation American Jewish New Yorkers sounded.
Now, all along here, this is the riverfront. And all along the river, those are all levees.
That's the Jewish neighborhood?
Well, we'll pass over that. Did someone call me Schnorrer?
When Woody Allen, as a young comedian, got to meet his idol, Groucho Marx, he felt he was confronting an artist in the league of Picasso and Stravinsky. But he later said that Groucho reminded him more of his own relatives. When I first heard the voice of the elderly 1970s Groucho on the Carnegie Hall LP, I was taken aback by how different the voice sounded. Less like Groucho Marx, more like Grandma Red. I have often had the privilege of playing the Groucho Marx character in the theater. I love this character, and I feel personal affinities with everything. The look, the walk, the music. And more than anything, the voice. It should never be easy to find within oneself the chutzpah to confront an audience as Groucho Marx. It wasn't easy for Groucho. When I find it, it's partly faithful imitation and a summoning of some inner something, the pintila Groucho. I hadn't really considered the ethnic implications of this until I was invited to appear at the Jewish Museum in 2015. The event was built around an exhibit of Andy Warhol paintings depicting prominent 20th century Jews. And my part of the program was a 90-minute unscripted interview, as Groucho, with the museum's then deputy director, Jens Hoffman. The museum is on 5th Avenue and 92nd Street, very close to the Marx Brothers' childhood home on East 93rd. And on the night of the event, the museum's auditorium was packed with a very enthusiastic hometown audience. It went well. It really felt like a homecoming. And at one point, Mr. Hoffman asked whether the Marx Brothers practiced Jewish humor. Thinking as Groucho, I replied with something he had said in interviews, that to be successful in vaudeville, you had to play all over the country, so the act couldn't be too ethnic. I worked in a line from the Brothers Vaudeville act that is often cited as an example of a gag that was too ethnic and too New York to travel. The line, delivered while standing on a dock, was, "This must be the Far Rockaway boat. I can smell the herring." And damned if the Far Rockaway herring joke didn't bring down the house. I said, "Yes, very funny on 93rd Street." After that magical evening, I began to think about these performances in a way I hadn't before, as a kind of inheritance from a Jewish elder, or service to a Jewish legacy. Groucho never completed high school or went to college, and he was self-conscious about it all his life, though he was a formidable autodidactic intellect and extremely well-read. He was fiercely proud when the Library of Congress acquired his letters, and a sampling was published as the Groucho Letters in 1967. He loved to associate with prominent writers and thinkers, and spoke with particular pride about T.S. Eliot. Biographers have sometimes overstated the extent of this friendship, but Groucho and Eliot were pen pals, and they spent time together during Groucho's 1964 visit to England. Now, T.S. Eliot is well known to have been anti-Semitic. Groucho probably knew this because it's right there in some of the lesser poems. In Burbank with a Baedeker, we are explicitly likened to rats. Perhaps he was able to set this aside out of respect for all that is good in Eliot's work. Or maybe he felt that he could fight racism with friendship. Eliot's bigotry didn't prevent him from loving the Marx Brothers or hanging Groucho's photograph on his wall. T.S. Eliot died during the first week of 1965, 6 months after meeting Groucho in person. Groucho was invited to speak at Eliot's funeral. He felt outclassed by the literary crowd, and, not knowing what to say, he told a joke about uncertainty and precariousness. "It's a story about a man who's condemned to be hanged. He's standing on the gallows with the noose around his neck, and the priest asks him, 'Have you any last words before we spring the trap?' And the man says, 'Yes.' He says, 'I don't think this damn thing is safe.'"
Doch wenn dich nicht, euer Fremder bist die ein Jahr. Durch jede wandert im Wert nicht mit, in Trucht in Herzen aus pintele. Lacht in die Sonne, wenn Gott es mit ist. Oi wer kennt ihn schlecht in Werk. Filmol ist gebrochen, jesrulig mit. Beigt sich vor den kleinsten Winterle. Doch der größte Sturm reißt ihm nicht euer Weg. Das kleinenke, scheinenke Pintele. Pintele jet, es ja geht, kommet in Stolz, macht es dir jet, ach es in Schätzet Hüt. Jeder lädt ein Kreun, das Pintele jet, viel gelitten Schäum vor den Pintele jet, gemartet deine Gliederlach, gepeinigt deine Brüderlach, geboten aus jeder in dein Blit. Will immer im Mul auf dem Pintele ist, doch mutig bleibt es Ruhe, du ins Pintele ist. Das kleine Sky ist ruhig, lass in ihrer Mule, bleibt bei dem Pintele ist.
Thanks for listening to Part 4 of Pintila, a 7-part series. The beautiful music you're listening to right now is Das Pintele Yid by Arnold Perlmutter, Herman Wall, and Louis Gilrod. Performed by Jacob Fuchs and the Jewish Theater Choir, Lemberg, Vienna, 1910. Other music heard in this episode includes Blue Skies by Irving Berlin, recorded by Sam Lannon's orchestra with vocals by Vaughn DeLeaf, 1927. Mir Foreign Kein America from The Rabbi's Melody, recorded by Jaime Jacobson and Fanny Lubritsky, 1920. Das Pintele Yid, recorded by Pepe Littman in 1924. On the Road to Calais, Al Jolson, 1918. My Mother's Eyes, George Jessel, 1929. Manhattan by Rodgers and Hart from the Garrick Gaieties, as recorded in 1925 by Harry Reeser and the Nightclub Orchestra, and in 1929 by Ruth Tester and Alan Gould for the Paramount short Makers of Melody. My New York by Irving Berlin, recorded in 1927 by Dave Kaplan and his Happiness Orchestra, and The Monkey Doodle Doo by Irving Berlin from The Coconuts, recorded by Bussey's Buzzards in 1926. You also heard Jewish Comedians by Alan Marcus, Shalom Aleichem Rhapsodies by David Ezra Okensar, Brookline Chairlift, and this version of Hava Nagila by Steve Rice, and other selections licensed from the Pond 5 Media Collection. Hillel Halkin is quoted from An Essential Point, The Foreword, November 24th, 2006. For more on Fiddler on the Roof, see Wonder of Wonders by Alyssa Solomon. For more on Al Jolson, see Jolson, The Legend Comes to Life by Herbert G. Goldman. And Only in America, Al Jolson and the Jazz Singer by Richard Bernstein. Groucho Marx's correspondence with T.S. Eliot and his account of the evening they spent together can be found in the Groucho Letters. A guide to my work with the Marx Brothers can be found at noahdiamond.com/Marx Brothers. Notes and links to these and other resources, and a comments thread where you can express your opinion about this episode, can be found at noahdiamond.com/Pintila.